Good afternoon to everyone joining us out there. We are very pleased to be here for this afternoon's third Thursday, broadcasting live from all over the country. We'll just give it a couple of minutes for everyone who's signed up to check in. Hope you have been having a good day and enjoying the sunshine and fresh air that's out there. Got a really interesting session lined up, as I'm sure many of you are aware. That's why you're here. We've been publishing some really interesting research over the last couple of weeks, working with partners in research institutions, in innovation networks, in order to support places to level up and harness innovation. So we're pleased to be talking about that and hearing from the report authors and some of our partners and some of our colleagues who are very expert in this space. So that will be kicking off in just a few short minutes. In coming weeks, hopefully, if you turn up to one of these, there'll be a nice 90-second video at the beginning, rather than me just kind of vamping whilst we achieve a sort of quantum of attendees, which will give you a flavour of what it's like to work with Connected Places Catapult. So do make sure you check back for next month, third Thursday. Maybe we'll have that ready for you to listen to and to watch. And of course, we were just chatting in the green room beforehand about when these might start happening in person again. Who knows? Maybe later in the year we'll be able to start gathering again for knowledge and networking as we used to enjoy out of our London office. But until then, we continue to operate remotely and take advantage of these streaming channels. So here we are. Well, we've got a sort of core number, and I'll therefore make a beginning. It's good to officially welcome you to this third Thursday at the Connected Places Catapult. As you may be aware, the Catapult is the UK's innovation accelerator for cities, transport and placemaking. We work hard to connect across disparate markets, silos and disciplines in order to spark new partnerships, new conversations, new possibilities, and accelerate the commercialization of innovation and the reduction of carbon in the ways that we live, work and travel. So it's great to be here this afternoon. We've got a great lineup. As I say, we've been doing some really exciting work in recent days on what it takes to spark and sustain an innovation cluster in all sorts of different places. We've looked at over 30 global locations and talked to over 100 of the same across the UK to understand their experience and their journey, and what it takes to stimulate an innovation economy in a local area. And of course, this is a hot topic when it comes to levelling up. The Chancellor in the budget talked about investing in creating hubs of innovation across the length and breadth of the country in order to sustain economic recovery and new prosperity in the future economy. But what does that mean? How do you go about creating those places? How do you go about sustaining them? We've been looking at answering those questions. I'm very pleased to be sharing that with you today. To kick off, we've got a bit of a poll for you. So Gail, if you can put up that question. There's 3 questions that you'll see. Do you consider the place you live to be an existing hub of innovation? So yes or no. So that's any of you who've looked at the playbook will recognize the 6 stages in the next question. But if you haven't, don't worry, they're fairly self-explanatory, and in a minute, Dr. Tim Moonan is going to explain them in more detail. But where on the journey do you think the place that you live or the place that you represent or work for sits on the pathway towards having a high flourishing hub of innovation? Are you just the sort of enabling stage? Are you at the stage of understanding the assets and the appetite for innovation? Are you setting things up, getting your strategy and partnerships in place? Is the local area putting plans in motion? Are you starting to see the first fruits of impact, or are you perhaps seeing real scaled return on investment? And then finally, we may return to this one at the end. What are the things that you think are needed by your place, by you perhaps as place leaders, as economic strategists, as innovation architects and entrepreneurs for your place? What sort of support do you see as being needed? What are the barriers stopping you or would help you go further and faster? So I'll give you just a couple more moments to tick and click and submit your answers to that. Again, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see, Gail. Have we got a sort of number of responses there? Excellent. Oh, great. So a majority of you think you already live in existing hubs of innovation. So that's good. Hopefully you'll be sharing some of your expertise and your insights of those places with others and asking questions to the panelists. But a good number of you don't. Lots of you are at the point of creating strategies and partnerships, and there's going to be lots to hear from today that I think will support you in doing that better and farther and faster. And there's a big surge towards interest in attracting investment, and so perhaps we'll be able to talk a bit about that later in the session. So thanks for sharing that. That's a really useful framing as we head into the session. Let me briefly lay out the agenda and what you can expect over the next hour. So you can have the next slide, please, Gail. Or do the one after that, the one that doesn't have my name on it. This is me. I haven't introduced myself. Hello, everyone. Apologies if you're wondering who I am. My name is Sam Markey. I'm the Director of Strategic Analysis for Connected Places Catapult. I've been the sponsor behind some of the research we're talking about today, so I'm very pleased to be hosting this gathering. There we are. Apologies for not introducing myself sooner. Here's who else you can expect to hear from over the next little while. So Dr. Tim Moonan, Managing Director of the Business of Cities, a strategic partner of the Catapult, a long-term ally, and occasional tenant of our London office in Seckford Street that some of you may have had the pleasure of visiting in the past. Tim in a minute is going to lay out the key findings from the research, the two pieces of research that we've done together as a kind of a brief introduction to those materials. Very, very pleased to be joined by Bonnie Dean OBE, who's the Vice Principal for Corporate Engagement Innovation at the University of Glasgow. She's here representing both the university, but also our friends and allies at the UK Innovation Districts Group, with whom we have partnered to validate and test and produce, in particular, the playbook for place leaders on hubs innovation. So we'll be sharing a bit of, from her experience in a minute. And then two august colleagues from the Catapult, Steve Turner, who leads our work with devolved and local authorities, talking about our experience and what we're planning to do next in terms of supporting UK local authorities to rise to the opportunity laid down by the upcoming innovation strategy and the place strategy and the anticipated growth deals, devolution deals, innovation deals, whatever policy language ends up being picked, the opportunity that's coming for investment and freedom and opportunity to grow through innovation. And then Dr. Amy Harden, who leads our global business, is also joining us partly to talk about the experience we've drawn from our global work stimulating innovation locations, but also the co-benefits and the reciprocal benefits that working internationally is helping in terms of creating new partnerships and pathways between those international locations and UK clusters, UK hubs innovation, potential for collaboration, partnership, and investment. So lots of brilliant people to hear from, and I'm sure we're going to have a really excellent session. You'll see, I'm sure many of you are used to this by now. There's a Q&A function at the bottom. Please feel free to raise any questions that you have, either general ones or to any particular attendees any point during the session. We're going to have a bit of a sort of keynote opening from Tim. We're going to have some introductory questions for each of the panel, and then we're going to throw the floor open. So please do send us your questions early on so I can plan and structure those accordingly. There we are. That's the sort of running order. That's what you can expect over the next 50 to 60 minutes. So I think at that point, it's time for me to hand over to Tim. As I say, Tim is a really world-renowned urbanist and economic advisor working with cities across the world. We're really, really proud to have a partnership and a relationship with him and his organization. And so, Tim, why don't you turn your camera on? There we are. Hello. Yeah, so we first published some research together on what we then called innovation locations in 2016, 17, something like that. It was a hugely popular piece of research, and it was exciting to be able to revisit and refresh that and see how the world had changed more recently. So what does the, perhaps you could talk us through, what is it that this updated review of locations tells us? What are the common ingredients? What are the common types? And Yeah, give us a flavour of what the research says.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, I think it was 4 years ago that we first began exploring this work with you, and it's been great to revisit it during these challenging times of back end of 2020, first quarter of this year. And I can't really go much further without saying a big thank you, not only to those who we spoke with and have been speaking with for many months and years around the world to inform this work, but also so many of you, including on this call, who have kindly given your time to us to talk about your experiences in the places where you are leading and working in the UK. Couldn't have been brought together without you. In a way, what we're talking about today are two separate but very complementary pieces of work that really fundamentally look to answer, I think, three questions, Sam. One is, why is it when we look around the world at all of the advanced economies, particularly the OECD economies, we might say, that every nation has turned its attention towards the opportunity of innovation places? They might call them innovation districts, innovation parks, innovation hubs. But the broad proposition is shared. And why is it becoming such an area of advantage and an area of attention around the world? And what does that mean for the UK? We've trying to explore what, if there are these phenomena, what do they really look like? In what ways are they similar, but how do they vary in terms of where they are in relation to our cities and regions, their size, their scale, their industry composition? Where is it that they've come from? Where is it that they're going? Who leads them? Who runs them? Who owns them? And what do we notice about the ones that really have succeeded over 10, 20, 30, 50 years? What do we tend to observe to be the ingredients that mean that not only they achieve an initial cycle of success, but also continue to sustain that, to reinvent themselves, to become part of the place more broadly that they are in, and to give back and to create what we call in this work whole place return? So in a way, there's been a real desire through these two pieces to go back to some fundamentals, observe the shared global practice, and try to condense that in a way that is hopefully, and you'll be the judge, user-friendly. And I think it's motivated on top of that by a set of recognitions for those of us who work in and around places of innovation, particularly globally, of a number of important facts, I would say. Firstly, that the UK is a leader, but certainly not the leader when it comes to thinking about how to bring forward at scale places of innovation that really unlock specialization and really drive high value jobs and highly inclusive local economy. There's a lot of a good practice and early success, but we're not a world leader. We have a lot to learn from others. Secondly, in a way, we have to unpick and unpack some of the language around innovation and places. Not all places that call themselves innovation hubs are such a thing. How do we know what they are and where they are? We know, of course, that many of the most famous innovation hubs and places around the world are places that grew up by accident, entirely without government observation, support, and investment. And it's only more recently that we see much more intentional and deliberate work. What does that mean? How does that affect what we understand success to look like? We, of course, know that places of innovation, hubs of innovation, are not a short-term play. They take 10, 20, often 50 or 100 years to really complete their maturity and achieve the kinds of effects that we anticipate that they will. And therefore, patience is key. And how do we manage that journey? And then finally, we might say that not all places that are hubs of innovation always will remain such as they evolve. Many will become more embedded in the fabric of their wider city or community. Maybe they'll become full service locations that are not as innovative, but maybe are much more successful in a different way. And we therefore observe through this work the constant journey that places are on. And what Sam was asking at the start, understanding where we are in that journey, is partly what we've tried to do across both of these pieces of work. Now, we might say that actually the UK has been through a roughly 50-year period where there's been an invention and reinvention and expansion of the idea of what it means to be an innovation place. We observe in the report, the different phases and cycles of science parks, of campuses around universities, of industry hubs and clusters, of, as we now know, of course, the last 10 years, very much innovation districts and quarters to the fore. and also these phenomena of innovation locations connecting cities or connecting a string of locations, perhaps along a rail or road corridor. These kind of phenomena have grown around us, and partly that's because of dynamics to do with deurbanization and then the move back to the city. Partly it's to do with where land has become available, partly it's to do with policy incentives. But we now have around us more than 100, as Sam said, locations that are by some measure or other a hub of innovation within their city or their region or their community. And we also observe that both globally and nationally, many of these places are delivering significant impact. They deliver impact not just in terms of those raw hard numbers of jobs and gross value added and perhaps talent attraction and retention, but they have a whole host of softer effects by driving a culture of collaboration among institutions, a culture of resilience among communities, civic participation. We try in this work to really unpick and observe those indirect spillover effects that made these places very valuable and important for both the nation to really focus on, but also individual cities and regions and places to really get right. We also observe in the Hubs of Innovation report, volume 1, if you like, that this is we see the different spatial phenomena, and understanding one's type is extremely important to know what is needed at the level of spatial planning and development, at the level of coordination and governance, at the level of what kind of places, spaces, and connectivity you need to really make these work. And this is really informed by a lot of experience in cities and regions around the world, where there really have been some fantastic progress at bringing forward innovation triangles, for example, places perhaps also in rural and much less urban areas, cities in Canada or regions in Canada and Switzerland and others having a lot of success in that area, for example. So understanding the location type and adapting and customizing to that, I think, is something that we've observed to be very important. And for example, let's give an illustration of that. If you can think about, well, on the one hand, we might have, the innovation corridor of, say, Sheffield, connecting Sheffield and Doncaster and Rotherham. We can see that, there's very much a focus needed there because you're spilling over several local authorities, because the economic geography is more complex. One has to develop the institutions and the coordination very deliberately and develop some particular kind of sort of what we sometimes call it almost like a gaseous layer of coordination on top to coordinate a very dispersed governance arrangement and create the kinds of nodes of placemaking and livability along the corridor. Whereas if you think about a quarter somewhere like King's Cross in London, for example, where there's much more of a focus on the mix of uses, on the capacity to host certain kind of anchor functions, on the reuse in a very authentic and sensitive way of heritage buildings, and densifying in the right ways and recycling the investment, all very important in places not only in the UK but around the world. So we try to illustrate the different types in this work. And then in the most recent work, we're observing, as Sam alluded to, the different stages, the 6 stages that we've seen places mature through. And it's fair to say that the majority of places are in the early stages, particularly in the UK, of this 6-stage model, where what we're really noticing is that there are 3 things that really have to be paid attention to all of the time. They might manifest in different ways and different places, but they are the place character and the connectivity of the place internally and to its wider area, the interaction between buildings and the connection into a given hub. The ecosystem environment, the connectivity and the community in terms of the networks, the trust, the specialization, the incubator functions, the ability to grow and host and continue to retain businesses as they grow. And then, of course, the leadership and the coordination. This is often a neglected or missing piece in many hubs. The idea and recognition that you need senior leadership of the institutions, you need some kind of governance that matches the scale of the location, you need increasing powers and competence to think and plan and move forward as demand grows and competition for uses grow. So we notice that these functions and this mix of requirements grows and grows and grows, and that the challenge is to be up to the task. And often what we see is that there's a risk that without paying attention to all these different areas and adapting through the cycles, innovation places don't always achieve the promise that they start out with. So what we're trying to do in this work is very much observe what it might take at different stages to really cross the threshold into a new cycle and really deliver that impact that has impact locally, but also spills over much more broadly. What does this all mean finally then on what we imagine and expect for the future? I think firstly that we can now see that there is plenty of scope and opportunity and potential for more hubs of innovation in the UK to come to the fore, to develop their confidence, become globally recognized and leading. Of course, that does require some degree of concentration and focus and selection and prioritization of certain places. But I think in general, more places have the chance to become the best that they can be. And one way that we think that that is really important to enabling that is firstly, on the one hand, paying much more attention to these fundamentals, the fundamentals of what is the climate for innovation like, how really functional is the local ecosystem, what is the place really good at, what does it really excel for, particularly globally, does it have the leadership in place, are the place ingredients, the physical character, the ways in and out of the place and the hub really firing on all cylinders, and what does it take over time? So paying attention to those fundamentals. And then secondly, learning together. I think there's a great opportunity. Of course, the Innovation Districts Group is a fantastic example of this, about coming together to learn together, to do the right things, learn from each other, avoid mistakes, and understand what is needed, frankly, of different kinds of players within the system, government, local and national, universities, big business, small business, other champions and enablers all have a role to play in these hubs. Understanding what they can do and when they can contribute, I think, is very important. How do you really deliver inclusion and social value at the same time as growing high value jobs, I think is going to be a growing challenge and agenda for this period of time. And I think finally, how do we understand the potential of these places to test, to experiment, to host a culture of experimentation and demonstration in places to show what good looks like, and use both the infrastructure to enable that, but also the soft levers, the trust building, the people factor, the relationships that all great innovation districts around the world tell us is the X factor that has been so important to their success. So looking forward to the conversation. We hope these papers remain very useful for those of you who are championing or working in different places, and looking forward to how this discussion evolves in the months and years ahead.
Fantastic, thank you, Tim. Well, thank you for a summary of what is an incredibly rigorous yet accessible piece of analysis and two really high value outputs. So thank you for introducing them to us. I'm sure many people will be diving into them. We've had some questions come in already. We will come back to those at the end. I'm pleased now to bring in Bonnie Dean. I mentioned earlier that Bonnie Dean is a vice principal at University of Glasgow, and is here, as I say, in part as a representative of the UK Innovation Districts Group, with whom we've worked on this output. Bonnie, I mentioned at the start that the Chancellor recently talked about investing in and supporting innovation hubs across the UK to support levelling up and the transition to the future economy that we all want and need to see. And we're very pleased to be partnering with your group. Perhaps you might just tell us a bit about the group for anyone who hasn't come across you, and then comment on the role that you see hubs of innovation playing in the UK's future economy.
Sam, thank you. Yes, I'd be happy to do that. We joined the innovation group the UK innovation group a couple of years ago. And for us, it's been an extremely useful association, because we're responsible at the University of Glasgow for leading with Scottish Enterprise and the City Council the development of a second innovation district in the city of Glasgow. And so being able to participate in this group and learn from other members who are more advanced than we are has been very useful to us. The group consists of 8 members: Belfast, Leeds, Liverpool, Bristol, Newcastle, Glasgow, and 2 locations in London. There are 5 elements to our mission. The first is that we want to lead a national evidence-based debate on the best way to develop these innovation districts, hubs, however you want to label them. We want to research trends, opportunities, challenges, and their solutions, such as we've done with this report with you. We want to drive a new, inclusive, and equitable approach to urban growth. And we have a significant piece of research underway on this particular point right now. And then we want to connect a network of practitioners, researchers, academics, policymakers, and businesses together. And that's something that's quite unique to innovation districts, this ability to convene disparate groups that are necessary to help bring things forward. And the final thing is we help each other. You know, it's just a terrific forum for if somebody has come up against something to really understand whether a member of the group has some experience in it or whether can make some introductions that take things forward. So in terms of your question about what role do they play, they're very important, I think, in the future economy. I'm just going to comment on urban places because I think others are more qualified to comment on rural places. But the urban places, I'll say, with challenges, whether that be industrialization, chronic health, educational attainment, absence of cultural activities, and sometimes multiple ones. So the particular one I'm working on in Glasgow, we have deindustrialization, chronic health, educational attainment. So there's just a number of things that we want to work with. And we're fortunate in that the community there is very ambitious. And I suspect in most innovation districts, if you connect properly with the community, you do find an underlying ambition that's just waiting for some support to take it forward. The innovation districts need a coalition of partnerships, as Tim was talking about in his presentation. Local government, businesses, knowledge exchange, organizations like universities, teaching hospitals, you know, just a whole range that can come together. But the most important thing about it is these actors are all located in the place. So they feel responsive to the community, feel that they can co-create with the community and can take a long-term view, because that's what is important. You know, it's a decades-long development that you need to go through to get to something that really thrives. So you want to move from survive to thrive, but that takes time. And then innovation districts and hubs also feel quite responsible to and for it. And that's important because you live in the place and you want the place to be successful. And I think finally what I would say is that innovation districts have an unusual convening power. And that's one of the reasons that I think Emma set up the UK Innovation Group, because she noticed in her journey of developing the legacy park at the old Olympic Park, her ability to pull together disparate people to actually make a change and move the dial in what she was trying to do herself. So I think I'll stop there, Sam.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm sure many people will have questions for you and perhaps your unique experience from Glasgow. I think this point about leadership is incredibly significant, isn't it? And I know that features early on the 6 stages that Tim laid out in the playbook, making sure you've got the ecosystem aligned, you've got a shared vision, you actually have the governance and the basic building blocks in place. And so that longevity is really, really important. I'm going to bring Steve Turner in, as I mentioned. Steve's one of our directors of the Catapult. He leads our work with local government and devolved administrations. Indeed, Steve, you yourself used to be a place leader in your area where you are calling us from today. And so I'd be interested to hear your reflection. You've been part of the journey of producing and steering and shaping these outputs with an eye to how they'll be used by local leaders. You've been talking to place leaders actively over the last season and in this time of talking about, you know, hubs of innovation, levelling up, how innovation plays a role. How do you see local government, how do you anticipate the partners you're talking to laying hold of these tools and making use of them?
Thanks, Sam. I mean, I think if I may start with just sort of a slightly deeper reflection. I mean, I think, you know, throughout the history of humankind, we've been littered with disruptive events, and inevitably, quite often, those disruptive events have driven innovation, the need to do things differently, which arguably is a definition of innovation, isn't it? And of course, we're hopefully at the tail end of one of those disruptive events right now. And I think what we have seen, you know, is in terms of that innovation, we've seen adoption of new technology or arguably existing technologies in a better way, and also new processes. And let's not forget about that element, I think, in the innovation piece. But from a local government placemaking perspective, we're seeing absolutely huge demand, I think, for, you know, this agenda. And I think the handbook is going to be incredibly useful to place leaders. And it's not just, for me, about innovation hubs. It's about what they bring to economic recovery. And Bonnie made the point about how do they enable communities to become more, if you like, or harness at least their innovation capability. And we should be seeing, and I think it was Donna Hall was saying last week, wasn't it? We're seeing communities and people as innovation assets and not units of dependency, which I think is a great comment. But it's not just about economic recovery for me, these innovation hubs. It's also about how do local authorities and their partners harvest some of the thoughts, some of the solutions, the ideas, such that they can deliver better outcomes to citizens and businesses at potentially less cost across their jurisdictions. So I think that's really interesting. I mean, the other thing I think, just as I've already said, the handbook for me is a really, really useful tool. And I wish when I'd had my career, which it may return in local government as a place leader, I'd had it, on the shelf to be able to pull it off and do stuff, because I think we've been able to do things a lot faster and in a lot more effective way, really. But the handbook is not just for the, if you like, the Super League hubs, pardon that current parlance there. It's for everybody. There's something there for everybody. And Tim's outlining, those 6 steps, which wherever you are on that journey, it's going to be incredibly helpful to support an innovation hub and a place in becoming more innovative. And if you like, moving the dial to the right. So I think really, really useful. I think it will absolutely help create the right conditions, I guess, for innovation and technology, harnessing of technology to flourish in some of our towns and our cities.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I certainly remember when I worked in London Borough of Barnet, we had the luxury of more, this was several years ago, we had the luxury of more time to think about some of these things. I know that over the recent times, local government has and its partners have had that capacity stripped, and so being able to provide a structured framework, as you say, the starting point to dig into your local conversation, as I say, I think is a really valuable way in. And we've got various bits of work underway, and again, you may want to comment on these when we come to further questions to further explore what the innovation opportunities and assets and strengths are across the country, and the way that we might be able to further help places who are picking up the playbook, looking at the research, and getting into thinking about what it means for them and how they make bids and deal propositions. So we can perhaps unpack a bit more of that when we come back. So thanks, Steve. Finally, I'm going to bring in Dr. Amy Harden, who as I said, leads our global business growth team, and really actually has pioneered a lot of this work for us. The Catapult predates me, and worked, I think, with Tim on the original release. So thank you for establishing this journey for us, Amy. You've been leading lots of work, particularly internationally and globally, on stimulating hubs of innovation around the world and creating landing pads for UK innovators. What have we learned from that experience, and how is that creating new opportunities here in the UK?
Great, thanks, Sam. Yeah, we've actually had quite a bit of success in working around the world with different types of innovation hubs. And I think it kind of crosses the gamut of the types of hubs, different types that you saw in the report, whether it's a corridor, an individual building, a tech park. And so we've done work, for example, in Sharjah at the Sharjah Research, Technology and Innovation Park, which is kind of a traditional park, yet focusing on really forward-thinking, progressive innovation and technology. We've worked with the government of India to look at individual smart cities around India, but to think about how do we connect all of those to a central hub. So with a national government providing a central hub with kind of spokes and wheels going to local hubs as well, so that we can enable that kind of peer learning efficiency across cities in smart planning and innovation. And then in a place like Africa, where we've worked with all different types of hubs, whether it's a building as a hub, a corridor as a hub, or a city and region as a hub, and connecting them up with peers in the UK, both for peer learning, for one thing, which is really critical for a lot of these places. We're all at different points in our journey. We all have something to learn, but also for business relationships, because this is about business. we're looking for UK businesses to have more opportunities abroad in some of these innovation hubs. And likewise, they're looking for opportunities for their businesses in UK innovation locations. And then finally, I would say that looking at individual cities as places, as hubs of innovation and connecting them up for ongoing investment. So these cities are looking for investment in innovation as a place. So I think there's three key takeaways that in all of the global work around this. I'd say that first of all, it's all local. Second, it takes a village. And third, it's reciprocal, which you've said, Sam. So when we think about it's all local, we can certainly come up with the methodologies, the playbook, understanding the indicators, learning what it means to be a successful innovation location in a time like ours. That's important, but you have to keep it local. You have to keep it contextual. We're not all going to be the next Silicon Valley, which is what everybody wants to be. And unfortunately, we're not. But what we do have are some really strong inherent strengths that we need to capitalize on and build on to become our own innovation location. And if we do that, we'll be unique among innovation locations. And when we talk about that it takes a village, this is something that Bonnie talked about as well, that need to convene a broader ecosystem. And it's not the usual suspects that you think. Certainly it's the big three of government, academia, and businesses, but it's lots of various subgroups within that. It's large businesses, small businesses, women-run businesses, it's citizens, it's different levels of government that you might not think right away to include: police, traffic, planning, not just the e-government section, not just the smart city division. And so you really need to get all of them on board and behind this early days to ensure success, because just as much as they could drive your success, they can certainly slow it down as well. And part of this is to break down silos and create more efficiency in whatever place you're working. And then the fact that it's reciprocal is really critical. We're talking about some really important issues right now across the UK, whether it's around net zero or leveling up. And what we found that the more that we get out there and work across innovation locations around the world, the more those innovation locations and those cities are interested in coming to work in the UK. As I mentioned with some of the examples, pairing up, sharing our entrepreneurs, lots of different reciprocity and becoming innovation twins, both for business engagement, but for investment opportunities as well. So there's certainly an element of direct investment coming back to the UK, in addition to growing businesses and their export opportunities. So it's quite exciting out there. And there's every type of innovation location that you can imagine.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, if I can invite all our panelists to come back on screen. Thanks all for those introductory comments and reflections. Everyone out there, you've now heard from our panelists. You know who they are and what their strengths are. So now's your opportunity to quiz them on what they know. We've had some questions come in already, so I'm going to start with these. But don't hold back. This is your opportunity to ask your question. So Mikhail has asked a question here, which I think Amy is probably well versed to pick up with in the first instance, then Steve may want to comment on. So when you want to learn from other frontline innovation hotspots or districts, where do you look or where do you go to do that? So Amy, you have a very special tool that you might like to talk about here.
Sure. So one of the ways that the Catapult looks at places that might make good partners with us is something we've developed with Tim and Dr. Tim Moonen and his team called the city typology. So we really have a granular understanding of 500, 600, 700 cities around the world and where they are in their innovation journey. And we typically look for three things, Mikhail. We look at what's the kind of hardware and software? What are the natural assets that a city has, the built environment per se? And then what are the ecosystem dynamics like? Is it a thriving kind of supply chain, entrepreneurship place, active academia? Is it a good ecosystem to be involved in? And then finally, is there the vision, support, budget, policy, and rules that will support it? And there's different levels of all of those three things that come into play. But what it means is it makes it very hard to point to one place to say, oh, there's an exemplar, because again, it's all local. What do you need to know to make your innovation location successful? It might be that you are very similar and can learn from Pune, India, or Ho Chi Minh. So, I'm not going to point to, I tend to, in fact, our database of 700 cities is intentionally not ranked. It's not about creating an index to say who's on top and who's on the bottom. It's about finding pairs, partners, business partners, investors, by understanding very clearly where people are in their journey.
I think that's really helpful. And indeed, Tim draws it out in the playbook that, this isn't a linear process. You can go around this spiral, you can go up and down, you can go forwards and backwards. And so I think you're quite right. The point about finding peers, finding challengers, finding people who are a step ahead, and those who are chasing your heels is really useful. But as you say, there are no simple answers for who's in the lead.
Sam,
yes.
I might just say on a very local level, if the question came from somebody in the UK, the group that has just become affiliated with you would be a starting place. I think a smaller conversation among 8.
Exactly right. No, I was going to come to Steve actually, and I think you're right. The Innovation Districts group is exactly where I would say. So Steve, we're doing some work to apply Amy's global perspective to a more UK specific audience. Do you want to comment on that, on what we're doing there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that when I was working in Manchester, Greater Manchester, leading a lot of the innovation work there was no single place to go. And in fact, cities are actually quite good, Sam, as you know, in terms of finding their comparator cities, on economic grounds, on demographic. And quite often in Manchester, we would look at Frankfurt or Barcelona. They were our the comparator cities. But, I think there's now an awful lot of wealth of information. The UK Innovation District Group, great place to go. Of course it is. The work that Tim's been doing and Amy's been doing. I think what we're doing, hoping to do now with it's version 2.0 of the City Typology Index, to do a UK version of that and really start to get under the skin, I guess, of which places, which cities are innovating. But critically, what are they innovating around, and what are their strengths and specific assets? And we may even see some clustering around particular assets, be it automotive or aerospace or med. We know that's out there. So I think that typology index will help understand that. But it'll also understand, what are the key, if you like, critical success factors that places are putting in place to enable them to innovate faster. And all of that stuff is in Tim's report. So I think what we want to be able to do is extract some of that and produce a nice long list. And it's not about, as we said earlier, about producing a super league of innovation places and town cities. Absolutely not. It's about knowing where to go to learn your lessons and having that conversation to share really good practice, but also what hasn't worked.
Very good, thank you. Well, so I'll come to you, Tim, next. This is a question from Finn, who I think, if it's the correct Finn, is an alumnus of the Catapult. So hello out there. So this is a question, Tim. Do you have any examples of where public policy has been successful in supporting agglomerations to grow and thrive, and which tools or levers does the government have? I suppose this would be interesting to hear from the global perspective on this, though there's obviously I'm sure a UK specific interest, but there may be some international examples of what works you could share.
Sure. I would say that when one thinks about that question, one, as you say, either thinks, how does it work? How does it work well in the UK? How has it worked well around the world? And then also, are we talking about local or perhaps metropolitan or national policy? In general, I think there's a recognition, or a growing sort of shared recognition, that on the one hand, we shouldn't expect too much from public policy. There are very few examples around the world where public policy alone, as you know, has been a driver of a kind of innovation economy. And in fact, what public policy really needs to focus on is, firstly, at the national level, all of those fundamentals around R&D policy and procurement and IP and entrepreneurship, incentives and infrastructure and skills. And then at the local level, it's about thinking, well, firstly, building that vision about what this city is really going to be, or what this place and hub or region or community really, what is its big picture agenda? How does it bring civic and private and other institutional partners into that vision? How does it audit not only what it's good at, but also how well equipped the public sector or the local government authority actually is to support and foster an innovation place rather than just usual redevelopment. So, you need a particular kind of planning regime that's going to support flexible uses. You're going to need a particular kind of set of relationships between your economic development department, your innovation teams, your internationalization departments. There's a sort of internal leadership, governance and planning audit that in a certain way is needed to know whether you're able to support and foster a particular kind of hub to grow. And I think in a certain sense, public policy's role is to understand how one can monitor, foster, support, enable what's happening around you, rather than sort of predict and plan and designate and declare, which is sometimes a temptation, particularly in countries where local authorities are relatively disempowered to make those kind of statements, where in fact actually building that proposition more broadly, I think builds the confidence that innovation can really start to flourish there. And then you've got all the other things that you will need as you grow, I think. And in terms of examples, I think, one could look to in the UK, Greater Manchester, perhaps a common example among the core cities group, a city where leadership and vision, strategy and coalition building has been right to the fore. If you look around the world, you can't look much further than somewhere like Munich when you see a very strong multi-level government approach over 50 years and a strong role of public policy around institutions as well. So there are many places and examples. And in fact, dare I say it, these two reports do touch on several of those as well.
Very good, thank you. I think it's fascinating the way that, as you say, the physical fabric of a place influences the intellectual, creative potential of a place, and things like planning and land use, which some people I'm sure would not consider necessarily to be an enabler of creative innovation, but actually is about creating the kind of environments that spark serendipity, that have room for companies to grow and scale. And certainly some of the work we do on that side in terms of digitizing planning is very much with an eye to creating agility and adaptability in place. Bonnie, I don't know whether you want to come in on this as a
I do, thank you. An example from Bristol, culture is very important and shouldn't be forgotten, because what you're trying to create is a place where people want to live and work. And Dick Penny, who leads the watershed in Bristol, started that several decades ago, and it is something that helps make Bristol and makes it attractive to people to come in and to stay.
Yeah, that's really good.
I totally agree with you, Bonnie. I mean, I think about my city where I live, Manchester. It's now Oxford Corridor, which is, a great hub for innovation. But that arguably the university played a huge role. But the northern quarter and those people that know Manchester, what was created there through planning policy in terms of a very mixed use development, very independent, allowed people to live and work very, very close proximity to the city over 20 years ago, enabled the right people to come and stay in the city and to retain that talent. So I absolutely agree with you around the role of culture in fostering that innovation environment. Yeah.
It's really useful. So, and I think you mentioned IP there in your comments, Tim. And I think, as you say, there's the local policy framework, and there's the global or the national policy framework, and the importance. I know that's exactly the sort of thing that the BEIS officials are thinking about now in terms of what are the enablers at a national policy level in terms of stimulating and encouraging innovation. And IP, I think, is one of those really key questions. How can you exploit? How can you share? And make sure that your interests are protected, but you've got room to partner with others and bring ideas together to form new value and new opportunity. Yeah, excellent. Well, Finn, I hope that answers your question. If you've got any follow-ups, feel free to ping them in. Great, lots of questions coming in now. Oh, we've got lots of familiar faces. I used to really enjoy Third Thursday in person because you'd see people who you knew, and I love the fact that actually I got people who are appearing on the questions here who I recognise. So that's lovely. Thank you for those. So a question from Charlie, who is one of our associates and a place leader herself, and has most of last year spent being chief executive at Sheffield. So her question, I think this one might be one for you, Bonnie, as well. The others will have views. So Charlie says, there's a strong emphasis on the need for patience and time, and also building a strong collaborative sense of shared purpose. Is that a one-off, or do you have to continually work at keeping all those partners oriented around the innovation vision and purpose?
I think it's constant work. And I think one of the most important things, particularly when you're trying to get things started, is the idea of co-creation, because so many places feel done to, and the people in them feel done to. And what you really want to do is unpack what are they aspiring for in their lives, and from there you can build. It's bringing the other institutions in so that there's a sense of parity amongst them. You know, one institution can be significantly larger than the others they need to partner with, and if you don't work it right, it shuts down a lot of ideas and a lot of willingness to collaborate and cooperate. So I think having patience, taking time, and really exploring how to co-create something that everybody can buy into is well worth it, because in the end, you'll end up with something more sustainable and stickier.
I might just add that a couple of points as well, which are that in a way, really interesting way that Charlie's phrased it about, you know, the continual work. And of course, that requires someone to do that work, and normally more than one person, ideally. And it's often a neglected feature of innovation places that they need dedicated resource and capacity devoted to that collaboration and that trust. It doesn't just happen through individuals, you know, wanting to just catch up every quarter at the, you know, the kind of quarterly meeting. It requires people who understand when there's a new opportunity, that how to galvanize players around that, how to build working groups or shared links through organizations downwards, not just at the senior leadership level. It requires lots of sorts of tactics. It requires lots of care. And therefore, it's a neglected feature that often should require, in a certain sense, some shared investment and shared capacity creation to allow for individuals or teams to be really at the heart of that. We see, you can go to many of the leading districts around the world where they'll immediately take you to the person or people who are the connectors, and know everyone, have everyone's address, know everyone by name, and are the interface for all kinds of investment opportunities, policy dialogues, etc. So that's really important. And the other thing I would say is that creation of some kind of governance framework that can evolve. Often what happens is that there's an initial attempt to build some governance, but it becomes inflexible when the scale of demand grows. Maybe there's a new anchor tenant or new specialization evolves. How can you create some framework that can adjust to that, and that can include more players, particularly more players from the private sector? Often there's a risk of it being only public and institutional leaders at the table. So these adjustments are key. And I think there is almost no example of a really successful innovation hub that doesn't pay attention to that sort of evolution over time.
Now,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Bonnie, please do.
I was just going to underpin that by saying that colleagues in Leeds said they didn't really get going until they participated in the MIT REAP program, because it insisted upon far more regular meetings and a declaration up front in terms of what you were willing to invest and put in it. And the seniority of the people who were there, so that you couldn't send proxies, you couldn't send substitutes. You know, this was a committed part of your working life to work on it. So, Amy, sorry.
No, I was just more in agreement with you, Bonnie, as well as Tim, that I think this is the case. And this speaks to, I think, Vicky's question a little bit as well around different types of government and governments that have different layers. And I think really it comes down to this approach more than what type of government you're in. If you take the approach of co-creation, that the types and levels of government don't necessarily matter. And we saw that in places like Sharjah, for example. We've seen that in places like Korea. We've seen it in India and other places. So it really is much more powerful to have this approach of co-creation and collaboration. And it's not quite as critical what type of government they have set up at a national level, because we see examples from all over the world of these very successful innovation districts from different locations, different governments, different places, different types, north, south as well.
That's really helpful. And I think that question may have come from our friend Vicky from Melbourne. So thank you if that is you, Vicky, from Melbourne. Good to see you joining. So there's a question which is quite similar to what we've just touched on, but I think it's a slightly unique one, and I think it's quite relevant to this question about growth deals and devolution agenda. So Ben has asked, are there correlations between local powers to make decisions on economic planning? So might this be paraphrased as, does devolution of power improve the potential to nurture hubs of innovation? So I suppose just to drill into the point you were just making, Amy, there's lots of different ways, different flavors. But Tim, does the places that have more localized, devolved power, are they better able to stimulate and sustain these kind of locations?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, and I would generally say that the knowledge and practice around the world does tell us that there is a correlation between the capability, the know-how, and the sort of metropolitan, or if you like, whole city, whole functional area scale of governance, and the ability to bring forward specialization, particularly when it's against the odds, in a certain sense, when the economic industry mix is working against what you've inherited. And that doesn't mean there's an automatic relationship, though. Often there are challenges about how do you continue to stay agile as you build those powers and build the scale, and how do you also sequence, if you're working with serious powers and perhaps greater scale, the right order of locations. There's a recognition or a risk we see around the world where too many places, particularly if they have large jurisdictions, try to unlock several places of innovation or hubs of innovation at once. And that makes it difficult to concentrate resources, effort, investment. Actually learning how to sort of sequence and which places are ready to go on to the next steps is all part of that journey. So a qualified agreement that yes, the correlation is there, but it isn't just about devolution. That's an enabler that then should trigger other kinds of process and thinking.
That's really helpful, thank you. And I think certainly if that's the sort of question that you're asking locally, then Steve will be very keen to talk to you about what further support or exploration we might be able to do to help in that. So I've got a question from Dagmar. So representing Bristol, good to have a wide range of places dialing in. So pointing out that Watershed is now led by someone else, by Claire Reddington, but equally as forceful and dynamic as
excellent.
Dick.
She set up the Pervasive Media Studio.
There we are. But Dagmar was asking, I think I might bring you first this, Amy, and then come to others, about how important super connectors like Dick or Claire are in stimulating and fostering hubs innovation, and are there downsides to having those kind of really dynamic leaders? Amy, you've led with you then work with colleagues in the Middle East who have been a force of nature in establishing and seeding these new locations. Is that a key ingredient in your experience?
Well, I mean, I've literally written books about this, that it takes local leadership to drive this type of activity in the global era. And I think it's actually more important, in my opinion, than the type of government they have, the type of approach they have, because a single driven leader can do more to advance an agenda than trying to kind of rework policies and other programs. And I would point to, certainly there are dynamic leaders as examples in the Middle East that are super connectors, but also in unexpected places. So one of the early places we worked was in, I mentioned it earlier, Pune, India. And it was driven by the local municipal commissioner. And a lot of people that have worked in India will know that it's difficult to work at the city level in cities in India. They don't have the power to contract with innovators and to do the type of things that devolving governments allows. And so in that instance, it was led by the municipal commissioner, Kunal Kumar, to set up a national India innovation hub. And it was just through sheer leadership and willpower, not the authority bestowed on him by the government powers. And he did, in the end, drive that up through the national government. And he actually now chairs the national smart city mission for all of India through the ministry. And so you can see examples like that with different types of governments. In my opinion, it is absolutely essential to have a dynamic connector leader that also brings people together, portrays a vision. Putting that vision out there is absolutely critical. Help people see the art of the possible and what an innovation district can be, and people will follow you. So in my opinion, it's probably one of the most important things.
Go on, sir.
I can
I would agree, but I think far more important, is robust partnership working. I think that is much more critical. An individual can only go so far. I think where we see, I mean, we talk about cities, there's some really interesting questions actually about rural places, aren't there, which maybe we'll get to some. But I think when we start to think, leaders are quite often responsible for world-class assets for a university, a football club even, which could be part of that, a civic entity. But it's about getting them to work in alignment around a single vision for that place. And unless they're able to do that, the place will not fulfill, I don't think, its innovation potential. So I think a superconductor goes so far, but that partnership piece, and then arguably partnership, what you give up, actually.
And I would qualify this to say, when I say leadership, I don't mean a popular mayor. I mean the type of people that know how to bring people around a table and form partnerships. And that's why it usually is not the top elected official. It could be the leader that heads the local business council or the leader of a citizen organization. So there's lots of different types of leadership, but the quality to convene and form partnerships and understand the criticalness that collaboration can drive this more than competition, although competition can also be healthy. Those are the types of leaders that can really drive innovation locations.
And are comfortable letting other emerging leaders come forth. Absolutely.
There was a very interesting podcast from the Economist Radio, I think it was last week, so if you subscribe to those, have a look. It was an interview with the mayor of Miami about the work he was doing to try and transition and turn Miami into a tech hub. And he used exactly that phrase you just have, Amy. The mayorship is the mayoralty. The mayoralty is about the power to convene, the power to convince. It's not the actual power. The real power is quite limited, but it's about being able to bring people together, lay out a shared vision, and take them on that journey. I've got a question here from Andres, which I think is really interesting, which is sort of the flip side of what you just said. In some places, it will be a private developer, or it might be not be the local elected leadership or the academic institution. It might be a developer who is the one who is seeking to stimulate and cultivate this local infrastructure. So we've written the playbook with them in mind as well. Tim, do you want to reflect a bit on how private investors and players outside the local state can use the tools to stimulate more fruitful local conversations?
Sure, and I think one thing we've really tried hard to do in this most recent paper is really try to observe what good practice looks like from both a business point of view, larger companies who happen to be located or perhaps moving to a new hub of innovation, or the real estate owners and developers, and how they can understand their role in this too. So there is lots to find out about that, and I understand the implication from the question that there are risks and tensions, and we do see many places often lose their innovation luster if they develop a narrow set of interests, or perhaps they become too opportunistic, or they convert too quickly into non-innovation uses. And therefore there is some degree of understandable skepticism. I think that where we see it done well, firstly, there's a desire to create a real genuinely shared vision. If you look at places like the Idea District in San Diego, for example, or some of the better locations in the Innovation Hub network in Miami, which surprisingly enough has really been on an unlikely transition into the innovation economy in the last 20 years. I think they have a responsibility, or when they do this well, to invest in the kind of genuine public space that is inclusive and open and non-intimidating, or it's open to all kinds of people. And they stage real events and cultural projects. They invest in the social infrastructure that makes innovation possible for different groups. There's also a growing phenomenon, just briefly, where I think where private sector districts are leading, or individuals or entities that are at the fore, to build some form of shared governance at the level of investment in the space, investment in the branding, investment in the communication, investment in the skills as well, the training, the workforce development at different levels. so that everyone can buy into it. I think we learn a lot from the North American innovation hubs, not least Philadelphia, the Rust Belt cities, you might say, further west, Philadelphia. There's a lot to learn. We try to package some of it in this work.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So Steve, as you said, there are some questions here about what about places outside the big cities and indeed the large towns? And I know that, as you say, we've been talking to local authorities and places about inclusive innovation, which, it represents a range of different inclusions. And indeed our global review includes a new typology, which is versus the last time, which is about sort of natural assets and a typology which draws not just on built environment but on natural environments. What do you think about these questions? Can rural places become hubs of innovation?
You give me a hard one. So that's interesting. I had a conversation this week with Welsh Government actually around their towns programme essentially, and how do they drive innovation? Because clearly towns and rural areas don't have the density, they don't have the agglomeration, which is a critical factor in terms of driving innovation. That said, I remember at the beginning of the COVID crisis, someone said to me, "Well, innovation is going to stop now because we can't meet in coffee shops." Well, that hasn't been the case, and the fact is, coffee shops have been around for centuries and centuries, and we've worked out new ways of doing things. So I think inevitably it is a lot more difficult for the reasons around density and agglomeration to do things in rural areas. So I think there's something around, maybe a hub and spoke model, which, sort of Wales are talking about, certainly in Scotland as well. We were having a conversation actually today with Perth and Kinross Council around an eco-innovation district around the Perth West, and how that can act as, if you like, a gateway and a hub to opportunities in terms of that wider rural entity to the north and to the west of that city. So I think there are models. They're going to have to be very, very different because, as I say, agglomeration and density has up till now been key. But what we've seen over the last 12 months is innovation hasn't stopped. We've been able to use calls like this to still, do things in a different way. And I think that probably is the big challenge for the rural areas, but it's far from insurmountable. Far from insurmountable.
I forget who asked that. It was an anonymous question, but whoever asked that question, you're still on the line. We ran a third Thursday early summer, which we will share the link to in the follow-up, which was called Lessons from Belfast and Beyond, Lessons in Levelling Up from Belfast and Beyond. And we had Jessie Hampshire, Director of Strategy for Cornwall, talking about their amazing economic activity, investment in the space sector, investment in green tech, and very much leveraging the natural environment that they have as an asset to build on. Not everyone can and should try and be Silicon Valley, as Tim said, but actually Cornwall has some incredible assets which it has managed to leverage and will continue to. So, great question.
That you've been reminding me, Sam, actually, of course, Cornwall set up the Innovation Cornwall programme, haven't they, with the University of Plymouth, where they've got these 3 centres where, that's sort of a hub and smoke model, essentially, isn't it, where people can come in and stay and develop and exchange ideas and thoughts. So, yeah.
Very good. We're coming into land. I'm going to ask one more question, which builds on what we just discussed. And then if anyone's got any other questions they're really keen to answer, or any comments from within the panel, then please do before I wrap up. But there's a question here about investing not in physical infrastructure, but in the digital infrastructure or the virtual infrastructure, the sort of soft infrastructure that might be available in a place. And I think, Steve, you touched on it a bit there in terms of not everything these days involves having a lab or having a physical building or a serendipity engine for people to meet and connect and do things. Some of this is about convening in other ways. So I don't know whether anyone on the call has examples of different, perhaps digital or virtual platforms that have proved successful in terms of bringing people together. I know that we've been talking and looking at how different places around the world are doing that and thinking about what we could offer, how we could help sow more of those around the country and indeed around the world. But has anyone got examples where virtual net platforms have proved to be a worthwhile investment? Perhaps not.
Maybe I'll
be happy to.
Oh, God.
I mean, there was born out of necessity for COVID. I mean, the global team has been running live projects all around the world, from Southeast Asia to Africa over the past year during COVID, and we had to pivot very quickly, especially in our Africa project, which was quite large, Urban Links Africa, which connected 3 cities in Kenya, 3 cities in South Africa, and innovators in those cities to innovators in the UK to address local challenges in each of those cities. Some of them would be considered hubs of innovation. Others is just bringing innovation to a city to improve quality of life. And it's a little bit of a distinction, but we had to pivot very quickly because we were trying to form joint ventures between these 2 businesses so that we could grow both UK companies and African companies to address some of the challenges. But we couldn't go there any longer. And so we created a platform, a digital platform that it was kind of a closed platform, but one that was secure enough where you can share data, share business practices with each other, and develop your concept up to the point of one needing to scale it on the ground. And so for the past year, we were able to create a very lively kind of place where that hub of innovation transferred, albeit temporarily, but I think it'll exist in a more hybrid model once we're able to return to those places where innovators could connect in that place, where innovation could thrive and where it could address both challenges within hubs of innovations, but also within cities, and create really equitable partnerships across those relationships. So I'd say that was quite successful. However, it still requires the deployment of that solution on the ground.
Steve, sorry, Tim, I think you're gonna come in, were you?
Yeah, so I was just very briefly going to say, I mean, firstly, we tend to see that the ability and appetite of a given hub or place to become digitally distributed depends, of course, on what industry and sort of demographic composition and sometimes what kind of urban or non-urban form it was previously in. Is being influencing that. And there are certain industries in which disaggregation and virtual work is much less possible for all kinds of IP, for infrastructural reasons, for other very practical reasons. But we are seeing a growing digital trend, both as Amy said about sharing knowledge and links between locations, but also within them. We're seeing sort of a growing set of models where one almost becomes a part-time member of a district or a hub, and that you become bought into the ethos of it, even if you don't live there, and certain models being set up like that. We see examples where groups or affiliations within a city are teaming up to learn about how they do things, or they're creating shared knowledge banks or shared knowledge platforms that exist where all of the latest innovation within companies or within institutions is being sort of downloaded or uploaded in ways that others can access and tap into. I think there's lots of sort of more useful and practical tools. I don't think it's going to replace those face-to-face needs, but I do think they're going to complement them, and finding that hybrid balance is going to be one of the secrets to success, I think, for a lot of places.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I think we're drawing to a close. Does anyone want to make any closing comments or reflections? You don't need to, but anything you were bursting to say that we haven't got to? No, very good. Well, thank you all for your questions out there. Thank you for sage responses and reflections to my panel. The Hubs of Innovation Global Review and the Playbook for Placemakers are now available on our website. There's going to be an episode of our podcast next week, start kicking off a new series on this topic as well. So if you're not already listening to our Connected Places podcast, do subscribe. You'll find it on all the places you normally find podcasts. And this week's episode is about active travel and what we're doing there. We've got various other events coming up. We're pleased to be supporting the Royal Town Planning Institute's award in a few weeks' time. We've got further work on public procurement, of course, how local authorities and their partners spend their public money is an effective way to stimulate and spark innovation activity in the local area. So if you're not already connected into our work on challenging procurement